Welcome to Just a Social Worker podcast with your host, Laurie Eldred, licensed clinical social worker and therapist. Welcome to the podcast that's going to talk about social work in very real ways. We're going to talk about the things going well, the pressing issues and needs, and things that we really need to change about social work. I hope you enjoy our conversations, the insights, the thoughts, and even some of the actions we can take to make our profession, our lives, and our worlds better. Enjoy the podcast. Welcome back to Just a Social Worker podcast with your host, Laurie Eldred. I hope everybody is doing well as I record this episode towards the end of May. And being in Michigan, it's just been a joy to see the warmer weather and feel the sun and see all of the greenery. And so today I want to talk to you about a recent U.S. Supreme Court case that came out impacting social workers and just providing therapy and some of the options, I would say loosely, in which therapy are provided for folks. So as a disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer or an expert in the law, and there are several great podcasts done by lawyers who are experts in the Constitution. And the viewpoint I'm expressing is framed by my work and professional training as a social worker and therapist. And in the show notes, I will add a link to a great podcast called Strict Scrutiny. And the episode that the ladies did on this case, I felt was phenomenal and really great in terms of looking at it from a legal perspective. And at the same time, I want to offer a social work and therapist perspective on this case. So this case dealt with the following. Kelly Chiles was a licensed mental health or is a licensed mental health therapist in Colorado, and she filed this case against the licensing board in Colorado. And it was involving Colorado's conversion therapy ban, which was involving minors, so those under 18. She markets herself as an evangelical Christian therapist who uses the Bible as a framework along with Christian-informed counseling for clients who specifically request this type of approach. And I know where I live, I see this framing, I see this advertising on Christian-based therapists and counselors within my local region as well. So probably similar to maybe what is happening in Colorado. And while that Christian influence, Christian-based counseling or therapy is not a concern, I think what I saw as a bigger concern for our profession is some First Amendment issues happening at the same time. So Ms. Chiles felt that due to her First Amendment rights, she felt this law violated these rights, especially when it comes to people who would see her for help in changing their sexual orientation or gender identity. And for those who don't know or unfamiliar with conversion therapy, it is a form of, I will loosely use the word therapy, or it's a type of intervention that would assist people in changing their sexuality or gender identity. This is not an evidence-based form of treatment. And in fact, many of our code of ethics for clinical professionals, social workers would prohibit its use. There's also other research that I will talk about later that discuss the harms of conversion therapy when it comes to kids and adolescents. So here's where it gets interesting. As a professional person and social worker, we complete our education, training, and engage in a licensing process to become social workers. And during the process, we agree to follow a code of ethics. And that agreement happens whether or not you are a member of a professional organization. For the case of social workers, it's the National Association of Social Workers. So for social workers, our values include honoring the dignity and worth of the person, competence, integrity, importance of human relationships, social justice, and service. So in other words, we implicitly agree to these values and we support and affirm the inherent dignity of the person. At the same time, we're also agreeing not to engage in harm when interacting with people, families, communities, and larger systems. As social workers, we also agree through our code of ethics to challenge injustice, oppression, marginalization, and discrimination. And in fact, the Code of Ethics was updated in 2021 through NASW, that National Association of Social Workers, that calls on us to engage in anti-racist, anti-oppressive practices, work, advocacy, and even just that clinical work that we do with individuals or in whatever way we practice social works. If you're a meso or macro social worker, maybe that's more about communities and systems that you're interacting with. We do that with an anti-oppressive, anti-racist lens. So because we operate as professionals and this relationship is unlike any other, we have a responsibility in how we communicate the interventions we use. This is why we have evidence-based work. And we also agree that our viewpoint shouldn't overtake our professionally informed education, the rigorous academic research that's done, our training, and our experience. So let's talk about conversion therapy and what we needed to know. This treatment, as I alluded to and talked about earlier, is this practice of helping or working with somebody to change their sexuality and gender identity, and really done in a way that sees sexuality and gender outside of very strict and binary identifiers as wrong. And most of us in the social work profession know that sexuality and gender often falls in some sort of spectrum and could potentially change or present in different ways throughout the course of our life, right? Who we are when we're adolescents is often different than young adults, different than middle age, different than kind of end of our lifespan. But what I want to be clear is that conversion therapy is harmful, and research tells us this. There are no real benefits to conversion therapy, and if a person is wishing to engage in this type of practice, as social workers, we really should be curious as to the need underneath the request, right? If we have folks coming to us in a social work or therapy role and wanting to make these really big changes or change parts of their identity, perhaps the approach could be getting curious and trying to understand what's going on to drive that need or what's going on underneath those beliefs, like where those beliefs are coming from, who has led them to believe this, right? Trying to really see the bigger picture of what is happening in a client's life. So the research says in a Stanford research study of over 4,400 people, about 4 to 34% have experienced a form of conversion therapy. So of those people, 91 people recalled some type of sexual orientation conversion therapy. And of the people who received this treatment, with quotes, 28.8% this was done by a mental health provider, and was a very surprising statistic that actually it's based on that research study. It's more mental health providers or organizations are providing some type of form of conversion therapy than a religious or other based organization. 85% recalled some type of gender identity conversion. 2.9% received this type of treatment by a mental health provider organization. And there is a substantial harm being created. So, according to the Human Rights Coalition, and I think the Trevor Project and other organizations really engaged in this work, are reporting very high rates of suicide, depression, also this being a driver of substance use and some other health related issues. So it was reported in this study 8 times the rate of suicide, 6 times the rate of higher of depression, 3 times as likely to engage in drug use, and a 3 times higher risk of STDs. So not only is this a mental health care issue in need, but it's also a healthcare issue as well. I want to also add that every major professional organization, including NASW, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, the American Medical Association, and on and on and on, have all come out with very firm stances that any type of conversion therapy involving minors is incredibly harmful, as well as many states, including the one I live in, have enacted some type of law restricting conversion therapy, especially when it comes to the mental health professions and professionals to protect children. And even the adults, right? We haven't even talked about adults engaging in some type of or some form of conversion therapy, but often that can be a side benefit when we're protecting kids. We're also looking at, you know, exploring kind of how we can protect adults in the same way. So I'm going to link these resources in the show notes so you can kind of explore them yourselves. Here's my concern as a social worker. This case really centers our individual rights to speech over our professional actions, which is really antithetical to all the professional development we engage in to become social workers. It also undermines our profession as a whole when we can claim that our professional viewpoints are more important than a client's viewpoints or a client's perspective. And some of our professional viewpoints we know can be informed by implicit bias, right? We're all swimming in the same waters. Us as social workers and therapists are not immune to implicit bias. We're not immune to our own struggles with racism and sexism and homophobia. And so the reason we engage in trainings that are ongoing as a social worker in Michigan, we have to have 45 hours of continuing education credits every 3 hours. And some of those credits also include implicit bias because we know implicit bias is a substantial issue within our profession. It's a substantial issue within our culture in general. So we do all of these trainings, this professional development or education or training, adhering to a code of ethics because that professional development informs the work that we're doing with clients. And we need to be careful that we're not letting our personal viewpoints interfere or overtake with our professional judgments, our trainings, and our code of ethics. And when we center our personal viewpoints, our personal opinions, right, that becomes tricky and potentially has some negative consequences because it can lead to overriding what a client needs, which can potentially lead to some. The people we work with trust us, and this trust is a sacred part of the work we engage in to be supportive, empathetic, safe, appropriate, and driven by the needs and agency of the person, including helping to reduce harm or engage in work that does not add to the harm of the person. My worry is this case seems to be adding to a larger dynamic of religious beliefs being more important than the basic humanity, dignity, and worth of the person. And as social workers, we're obligated to work with all sorts of folks. Some are people of different or no religious beliefs. Some have different religious beliefs or even different worldviews. And barring extreme circumstances, we should not pick and choose who we work with due to a difference in views. And this is a slippery slope, again, that can be based on our implicit bias, ones that we might not be even conscious or aware of. As social workers, we also should know that people engage in a lot of behaviors out of fear, lack of information or knowledge, lack of support, their own upbringing due to trauma, or most likely several other things. We are complex beings and we often operate from different schemas that can lead to harm or unintended consequence. And as social workers, a function of our work is to provide psychoeducation, make referral to services, coordinate care with other providers. And in some cases, we engage in clinical work as a therapist. That's what my role is currently. And because of our clinical development, we can't operate in a way that is harmful to others because we know what works and what doesn't work. Our profession has helped develop those standards and engaged in pretty rigorous research. So, with these thoughts being said, I hope you enjoy the first season of Just a Social Worker podcast. I'm going to be taking a break for now, but I have some exciting news to share over the summer, and I look forward to season 2. Thank you for listening, and I hope and know you will hear from me again soon. I also would love to know your thoughts and feedbacks just on the quick analysis and thoughts that I provided on this recent case. Right. We are very new into the fallout of this case. I know the court did send the case back to Colorado to use a strict scrutiny framework in order to apply this law. And so, again, I'm going to direct you back to that podcast episode that will be in the show notes. But I also just wanted to have this conversation and really kind of get these thoughts out there on my own feedback of this Supreme Court case. And again, I will see you. You'll hear from me again soon. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you for listening to Just a Social Worker podcast with your host, Laurie Eldred. This podcast is not a substitute for therapy, nor is it a form of therapy. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Should you find yourself in need of support, please check out your local mental health resources, which could include your local community mental health, your local emergency room department, your local crisis mental health center, or you can call the national hotline at 988. Thank you, and thank you for listening.